Well, hi, friends. Welcome to episode 349 of School Librarians United. I am your host, Amy Herman. This podcast is dedicated to the issues and challenges school librarians face every day. As a school librarian in my 19th year, I knew I wanted a podcast which addressed the nuts and bolts of running a successful library program. I don't claim to have the answers, but I hope that this is a platform to share resources and exchange ideas. Now is a perfect time to mention that all the ideas and opinions expressed in this podcast by myself, my interview guests, and listeners who reach out to the podcast are our own and do not reflect those of our school districts. When incorporating research, I always make sure to cite my sources. So whether you are a novice or a veteran school librarian, this podcast has something for you. I welcome you and all listeners to reach out with your feedback and episode suggestions. You can reach me on Facebook, on X, formerly known as Twitter. My handle is at @LMS_United. On Threads and Instagram, you can find me at School Librarians United, and on Blue Sky at SLU Podcast, or the email address schoollibrariansunited@gmail.com. If you include your mailing address, I'll be sure to send you a podcast sticker. Friends, I am currently collecting recordings for a conflict resolution episode, and I'm hoping some of you in our listening audience will consider sharing your strategies. Think of a time you addressed some pent-up resentment with your assistant, or frustration with a teacher who never fails to offend you. Or perhaps there's an especially demanding family or an entitled student who tugs at your very last nerve. I'm hoping you'll share these tips and tricks for conflict resolution in an upcoming episode. Just email me at schoollibrariansunited@gmail.com, and we can find an evening to record a 7 to 10 minute conversation. Deadline is February 20th, and my goal is to post this episode at the end of February or early March. And now for today's episode, Inquiry with the Tinies, and my conversation with Valerie Jopeck. Valerie Jopeck, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, Amy Herman. It's so great to be with you. We loved having you at our Virginia School Librarians Conference last fall. It's awesome getting to know you and such a pleasure to be with you.
Well, you know what? I got to tell you, that was a real highlight because it was sort of like playing hooky. I left my day job. I took a couple days off, personal leave, to go surround myself with school librarians. It was, I'm going to say, right up there with going to the spa because
That's great.
Yeah, mentally, emotionally, I came back a far more pleasant person in a better headspace. My family appreciates when I leave and come back happier than when I left.
Our families often do. Yes, conferences are great for that.
Yes, absolutely. My mental wellness was sated when I was able to surround myself with school librarians in Virginia. So let's go ahead. Would you introduce yourself? Tell us about you, your library, the grades you serve, and some of the programs that you offer.
Sure, I'd be happy to. So my name is Valerie Jopeck, and I'm a practicing elementary school librarian in the Washington, D.C. area in Northern Virginia. I have been a school librarian off and on, a practicing school librarian off and on for 13 years. I'm a career changer, if you could see my face when you see my face. I started out as a social science researcher for a major national NGO where I got to work on a lot of healthcare policy issues and just really enjoyed kicking that off and worked within the realm of making sure that everything that we were bringing to the table, everything we were putting into studies, we were able to verify, we were able to cross-check, we were assessing for bias constantly. And I mention that because that kind of background infuses everything that I do in my library.
Wow. And with your littles, I mean, friends, this is what makes this conversation so much fun because we're not talking about a collegiate experience. We're not talking about working with graduate students and people working in their master's degrees. We're talking about 4- and 5-year-olds.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Because they're, children of the future. No, I'm not going to sing. Nobody needs to hear that. But being able to work with our youngest learners at a time when their brains are developing most robustly It's an important responsibility, and so I don't treat them like they're dumb because they're not.
Well, and I was so fortunate because I got to see this presentation. Oftentimes I hear about a presentation and everyone's like, oh, you've got to have this person on your show. They're going to be amazing. But I actually just sat there in the audience. I had the best time, quite sad. I didn't have this particular lesson I could then turn around and use in my libraries because I'm now at the high school level. But I'll tell you what, there were a lot of very appreciative audience members who were very engaged because the lesson you were teaching us at that time could be turned around and used in the classroom, on Monday when you got back to work. Now, obviously a little bit of prep, but yeah, I loved learning from you during your presentation.
Oh, I appreciate it. And really, again, I appreciate so much your being there. And one of the things that I like about this lesson, and we'll talk about it as we go through, is that there's a lot of scalability with it. Once you get the resources done, you can use it with a lot of different populations of learners and a lot of different grade levels. So I suspect you might even have some use for it with some of your high school learners also.
Well, and again, it really, every time we watch each other do our jobs, and even when you're sort of simulating, this is what I would do next, this is what I would do next, and this is what I would do next, you're like, oh, I see exactly how this is going to work. So friends, make sure you check out the resources in the show notes. Before we dive into this terrific lesson you're going to share with everybody, I'd like to better understand your beliefs that guide the lessons which you design, because you made a point of emphasizing this before you got started.
Absolutely. So one of the things that absolutely informs my practice is that I love being a librarian. I love libraries. It is my belief. It is a core belief, professionally and personally, that libraries matter. And I think sort of the words attached to matter has become a little overused in the last few years, but libraries really do. We've been around for thousands of years, and our profession is quite simply one of the oldest. And within the context of our country, libraries matter for voters. Libraries matter for the continuation of a functioning democratic society, because libraries are places where people, anybody, can go in and get information for free. Yes, they can get books and they can get novels and they can get stories and they can get all kinds of other resources. But really, it's a place where trusted professionals curate trusted resources. And libraries, wherever they sit, have this responsibility, and librarians, wherever they are, have this responsibility. I just get to be, and we get to be as school librarians, lucky to be the ones who have the libraries in the schools. And schools exist to educate future voters, future active participants in a democratic society. And I don't take that responsibility lightly at all.
Well, and I love you mentioned about the history of the institution of the library, and it was the great egalitarian sort of democracy builder by educating people regardless of their walk of life, and creating libraries around the United States was so vitally important in raising a largely sort of immigrant, non-English speaking community into one that could absolutely enjoy the society that was being built around them. I love when I teach about the history of libraries, especially to my younger students, I would have pictures of the sign where it says the free library. And I use that, and I know in Philadelphia, it's still called the free library. And
yes.
I love that because I was
in Baltimore it is too,
yeah,
right?
It says free library. And so you put that up on to show the kids, and you're like, it's called the free library. And they're like, all libraries are free. And I'm like, not originally. And then we talk about, having book clubs and the founding fathers who all had these very elite, clubs where they would invest and decide which books were going to be bought and shared. And it was a members only. And these gorgeous libraries that were members only, and you had to pay into them. And it was a much more fun lesson when Blockbuster was around, because kids understood that you could go and get videos, but you had to pay for that. And that when you can now get them at the library, that was where it became, free. And so Anyway, I get distracted. Friends, all right. So, let's talk about building visual literacy, because I love that this becomes so much the driving force in what you want to have your littles. And when we talk about this littles, we're talking, I assume, about kindergartners. I used to also have preschoolers in my building, but when we're talking about littles, usually like K1, but initially. But you also expand this lesson to much older students
Much older and
and
much
much
younger.
younger.
Yeah, so and I sort of skipped over your question about, tell us about your program,
Oh, yeah.
and talked about me, which is
Oh,
something
well,
that
there you
people have
go.
known me for a while, like, "Oh, she did that, of course." So right now and I'm in a new school for me this year. It's not a brand new school, but it's new for me. And we have an exceptionally diverse population and a lot of littles, which is why I bring this up. I see 28 classes a week. 2 of those classes I see twice a week. And one of those would be my preschool, quote unquote preschool, used to be called Head Start. And the other are my Cat B students. I see them twice a week. We've got 28 home languages, English, Spanish almost as much as English, with other big pops with Arabic, Amharic, Vietnamese, Pashto, and Urdu. And a school right next to mine might have completely different demographics. You talked to my colleague, Kanan, last year, or late at the end of the year, and we are probably 2 miles from each other, our schools, but our populations, that language mix is very different because that's where we live. But thinking about my littles, just a little bit less than 9% of my student population are early childhood. And that's what we call that now, early childhood. And so those would be, yes, my classic Head Start kiddos, which we call preschool. I have a class of what we call ECCB, early childhood kids who get some medical services. And some of those kiddos are, 2 or 3 years old. And I also have 2 preschool autism classes that I see.
Wow.
So
Wow. But I think it's amazing. I mean, these kids are so lucky to have you as a librarian. And I do have to ask, you had this previous career.
uh
I need to know, what was that light bulb moment where you said, actually, I want to become a librarian who works in a school?
it's a little bit of a journey. My mother would say it's because I like to tell people to be quiet. But anybody who's ever been in my library knows that it is the least quiet place in the building. I abhor shushing people. If it's a quiet library, I get really anxious and nervous. But making that journey from working with adults to working with kids is really, really easy. I did a brief stint in our central office. I was our district librarian for elementary libraries for a couple of years, and I miss kids. Kids are amazing. Kids are wonderful. Kids are awesome. Um, I have my own grown children, but you'll hear me tonight not talk about my students. I'll talk about my kids. I don't mean the ones I gave birth to. I mean my 464 students that I see every week. Um, it's an easy change to make. The library gives you so much freedom, as you know, Amy, right? Yes, we're serving our students and we're serving the goals of our administration. But when we get inside of a library and we have access to everything, we have all the resources. We have everything at our fingertips, and we know how to use them for the benefit of our students and staff. Gosh, there's nothing more fun than that.
Yeah, sometimes I call myself the matchmaker. My job is really just to, I find something. It could be a lot of things, but I find something, and now I need to put it with the person who needs it the most. And sometimes it's an article from the New York Times, or it's a podcast episode I listened to over the weekend. And sometimes I realize I know something about one of my colleagues that's working on something, and then I just learned something else that my other colleague's working on. And then I was like, okay, you two need to talk. And then so I take a conversation I've had separately with each of them, and that is as important to them as it might be putting books in the hands of a classroom teacher who's working on a lesson, or, when you're talking to administrators and they're trying to solve some problems about logistics and student movement. Really, a win is a win is a win. And to define that strictly on the basis of how many books did you check out. And when I made that transition from elementary to, I leapfrogged over to high school, it was very hard for me to use the same metric of success because it was so easy I say easy, but it was something when I was a elementary librarian, it was very easy to feel excited about the volume of books that moved in and out of our space on an hourly basis. To use that as the same standard for my high school, which has a flexible schedule, and I'm servicing about 1,300 students, but we're not doing that fixed schedule checkout where each kid comes in and can check out 3 books. And it's a very different way to measure success, but you still have that success. It just looks different. So, all right. So let's get started. I love this because, friends, I did get to be an audience member of Valerie's, but you and I didn't get a chance to really chit chat. I sort of threw a business card at you or something. I said, hey.
Oh, cute packet.
I did.
Gosh, if Amy sees you out and about and hands you a packet, take the packet and stuff. Cool stuff in it.
Yeah, a little library swag, and hopefully an opportunity for us to connect in the future, because I got to enjoy your session. And I know there are a lot of people who will extract from this conversation, and especially those show notes, a great lesson that you can then use to work into your curriculum as well. Before we get started with the design of this lesson, Valerie created, and this is slide 6. So slide 6, I believe, needs to be taught to all educators. Forget about being the designation of school librarians. I'm talking about being an educator. This is like, these should be the thou shalt not and the thou shalls. I don't like to use a religious reference like a 10 Commandments thing, but when we're talking about some things that guide you in the lessons that you design, please tell us your non-negotiables when it comes to creating lessons that work in your space.
You're talking about the money. Absolutely. So I've been at this for a few years, and one of the things that I've learned to do is not spend my family's money at school. I made that I made that choice. I won't even say the word mistake. I made that choice when I was a baby librarian, right? And I loved my students, but what I have learned over time is that I needed to love my own children more and take advantage of the resources that my district provides to me. So no more, blowing out way, way, way too much money. And I mentioned it in my presentation at Vassal. It was a horrible sum of money. The waves of judgment almost knocked me over coming from the back row. But I would strongly recommend to those who are listening, who are just starting out, to really tap into the resources that your district has, that your state has, that your building has, and make use of that. And that's what this lesson does. Absolutely 100%. Even if your own district, and we're all going through budget cuts, we're all going through budget cuts. States do still have, through their state libraries, great electronic resources that can make some of this a lot easier.
Yeah. And I love that because it really does shift the burden away from what can you produce to gleaning from resources outside of your immediate, school. You may not have those, but I know a lot of states use that taxpayer money to provide some larger databases and resources. I know, especially also at the district level, there are oftentimes circulating resources which you can check out, and you may not have those resources with you in your back office, which I know is more fun. But being able to reach out to your to your county level, you also may be able to do that. But, I also, let's talk about some things that that frame when you write lessons. What are some of those thou shall that you want to remember, those non-negotiables when you're talking about what you want to do when you design your lessons, when it comes to creating those lessons?
When I'm designing my lessons, and as you know, we don't have a curriculum as librarians. We feed off everybody else's, right? The library is a content facile place. I always am aiming to hit at least 2 different content area standards when I'm designing a lesson. More often than not, it's language arts, and more often than not, it's social studies. Those are the areas where I am most comfortable. This year, however, for example, my evaluation goal is tied into our science goal as a school. And so I'm hitting science a little harder this year. And I'm trying to incorporate math a lot more. So I'm always rooting what I'm doing in our other curricular area standards. One of the reasons I do that is because we are a library in a school. And more often in the last 6 months, I have overheard or had said to me than in the last decade. Well, if what you're doing in your space isn't leading to our accreditation chances improving, or I can't see a measurable impact on how your program, whether it's in music or in library, wherever it is in the building, if it's not addressing our core four, or really now it's being talked about as the core three, because social studies for some reason is going by the wayside. Let's pause and think about that. If it's not meeting math, language arts, and science, it has a lot less value, at least within the public school realm, right? So I need to make sure that what I'm doing adds value because I like my job, I like my space, I know we have value, but in a school setting, we have to prove that a little bit more. And in an elementary setting, where more often than not, at least in my part of the country, we are on what we call the master schedule. We are on a fixed schedule. We are covering other teachers' planning time, so they're not in the space with us. I've got to lift up what our school improvement goals are in the work that I'm doing in my space.
Well, and I do like, especially because this is a nonfiction lesson. When I was in elementary, consistently nonfiction constituted half of our checkout. And that's because I found that nonfiction was a really easy type of book to push because kids identified with the pictures and all those nonfiction text features. And, I think that nonfiction is one of those things that's so accessible to students, and especially when they want to move away from illustrations and they like and learning. Especially I remember with my littles, knowledge was power. Now, knowledge was power, and they liked having something they knew that they could share with others because they felt smart, and it was currency. They liked the currency of having this ability to learn something and then pass that information along to others. Friends, if you take your thumb and your first finger and make a little chain, so you put your hands together like this and you make a chain, you're making a connection. And so my students, oftentimes, if I was talking about something, the hand would go up, Mrs. Herman, you're making a connection. And then they would put their thumb and their four fingers together and bring those hands together, make the chain. Mrs. Herman, you're making a connection with something that they were doing in class. So when we're doing butterflies, we're doing butterflies in the library. When we're doing owl pellets, we're doing owls in the library. So I liked that this lesson it easily connects with the kinds of things that you might find in an elementary classroom, like seasons and community helpers and those sort of concepts that lessons get built around.
Absolutely. And I want just to tag on to that, sort of in the overarching sense of the general themes of the units is where I'll tap into things. But where things get super specific, I try to give kids the chance to broaden their scope, to bring in their personal interest and their personal desire for learning so they build that capacity up. So we'll broaden what's happening in the classroom, in the library, to give them that chance to become experts.
Excellent. I love that you provide context for when during the day you see your tinies. And this is really key because I remember a real big issue that I had was I saw my kindergartners after lunch, but before nap. And it was a problem because some of these kiddos were just crashing. I mean, after lunch, they had gone to recess, but it wasn't time for rest time yet. And they would just head down on the table and just go to sleep. And you know what? We just walk away. We just let them sleep. You don't sit there and wake any of them up. But, when you have your students, whether it's first thing in the morning or it's at the end of the day, we used to have upside down days where we would, just for funsies, sort of turn the day on its head. And to see those afternoon kids first thing in the morning, or to see your first thing in the morning kids at the end of the day when they're all wired up and Oh, man. It changes the dynamic so much.
It really does. It really does. Yeah. And I see my preschoolers, my former Head Start preschoolers, right after their nap. At the beginning of the year, they were still struggling with that whole routine, and they would come just, I would go to them the first weeks because they were so bleary-eyed and putting their mats away and figuring out if they were gonna have a snack. My preschool autism classes, I see first thing in the morning. For them, it works really well. I'm happy about that arrangement. I know I'll be making a pitch for, "Could I not see preschool right after a nap? Could we get them at a little bit of a different time?" Because I want to be doing more of this really deep thinking work with them. And I think they like it better when they're a little bit more awake and a little bit more on the ball because no kids like to feel like they're sort of, oh, wait a minute. I could get there. I just don't have those basic Maslow needs being met, right?
Exactly, exactly. So, the lesson you're sharing with us today strengthens an impressive list of skills. And it really is. I'm sitting there like, wow, you're getting those are a lot of boxes checked when you
Uh-huh.
realize all the things you wanted to accomplish. And you did it with us in the session, which really made the learning experience far more meaningful, I know, for the audience members.
That's very kind of you to say. Sure. So, the main thing we're tackling, of course, is visual literacy. And I wanted to do this with preschoolers, and we'll talk a little bit later about the scalability of this with preschoolers because, you know, it's not that AI is coming, AI is already here. And deep fakes and all of the ways that we're trying to, as adults, address and make meaning out of the way that ideas and information are being represented to us is just so challenging, I think, for us. And imagine being a kid. And when we are working with our littles, with our 3, 4, 5, 6 year olds, we're catching them at a time when their brains are at their most flexible. I don't use little words with the little kids. I use big words with them and I help them understand what it means. So we talk a lot about when you turn 2, you have something called a myelinization happens. And your brain smooths over a little bit and all the things you learned up until the age of 2, right? How to walk, how to talk. That becomes pro forma, becomes more automatic. And then between the ages of 2 and your late teens, you go through this second big arc. And that is when your brain is at its most, like learning all of this stuff and wiring up for everything. And then you get to be a little bit younger than we are, Amy. And that kind of stops, right? And so we get our kids, our K-12 kids, in that peak period before that second myelinization with the brain. And our littles are prime for that. And so we're helping those neural pathways get created. We're helping those patterns of practice get created. And if we know that the future is more visual than it already is, right? If we know that they're going to be continuously bombarded with the need to assess and evaluate and determine what is true and what is not true. And by the way, facts matter, right? And in a library, facts sit in a library, that's part of what we do. Then part of my job as a librarian is to make sure that my students understand how to discern what is factual and what is not factual. And I've come to understand that by building those skills to analyze photographs early, to analyze video early, is important to creating those neural pathways for them that I think, based on the reading and research and reflection that I've done, will benefit them, maybe not tomorrow, but hopefully will benefit them in the years to come, that I've done them a service again as a future citizen voter, right? So we've got that visual literacy building, right? That those neural pathways being created. I want them to understand what it means to do close looking. And I want to add a word to that. It's slow looking. We go so fast on every single thing. When I watch kids playing video games and they whip, 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 whip through those cutscenes. Like you can't possibly be getting everything. Or they get the graphic novels, they flip, 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 flip through it. You can't possibly be getting all of that. They say they are. Their brain is certainly moving a lot faster than mine is. But I want to give them that opportunity again, young, to look slowly, to pause on the details, to glean, squeeze out every one of those 1,000 words that you get out of that picture, right? A picture's worth 1,000 words. Let's get it all out. Let's talk about it. I want them to use reliable information sources. And we're going to go through where I get my images from. And I talk to them about that. I'm very open about where I get my information with the kids. I'm very open about why I'm using resources with them and particular resources with them. I want them to see and hear my metacognition happening. So hopefully it plants a seed in them that these things are relevant and important in their own information seeking. I want them asking questions. And preschoolers, anybody who's been around little kids know why, right? They're natural inquirers. And we can keep them inquiring into the things that they might get stuck on, or we can broaden their horizons and let them, again, grow those neural pathways and, increase those little gray cells, as Hercule Poirot used to say, make their brains as wrinkly as we possibly can when they're little so they don't fall out of their head when they yank it to the side. And then we start them on synthesis, right? When we think about higher order thinking skills, synthesis is the foundation one. If they can't synthesize, those other skills don't build, and that creates problems for us as a society down the road, right? It feels a little teachy preachy sometimes to say that, but again, we have an obligation, those of us in the education profession, to educate.
Exactly. I do also want to emphasize that all of this is nonpartisan. It is
Yes.
thankfully,
Yes.
blissfully nonpartisan. There is no reason why anybody would disagree about the value and the importance of what you're doing with their students on a daily basis. So that when we're talking about using visual literacy to support that next generation of thoughtful, critical thinkers, we can do this entirely from a nonpartisan perspective.
Absolutely. And of course.
So I like that because you're not going to alienate anybody. And I know when I first got started with our visual literacy lessons, you do a Google search for a rainbow unicorn kitten. And then I said, hey, we're going to talk about this rainbow unicorn kitten that I'm going to get. And they're like, Mrs. Herman, that's not real. I said, yes, it is. Look, it's a rainbow unicorn kitten. And they're like, no, that's not real. So we have these little absurd conversations, but it's important that they see that they can challenge what is right in front of them. And I think that it is a lesson that people my age need to be far more skeptical. I remember sitting in a couple real early AI workshops, and they were talking about which person in this, which person is not real, which person has been AI generated, and trying to select of the pair of photos, which is the human and which is the AI generated. And I swear my eyes would just go cross-eyed trying to discern, looking at those pixels. But it was important because we are still very able to make those decisions based on, what we've learned over the years as to what we can trust our eyes to do versus what machines can do. Let's dive into this lesson. What kinds of resources are our listeners going to use in order to recreate what you've done? I know because when I walked in, you had done the work, but these were resources that you had obviously used in your classroom setting, and you were going to teach us like you would teach your students.
So essentially for, those who haven't looked at the slides before, you've listened to me and Amy talk about the lesson, what I'm using are paper-sized color photographs of real objects. Most of them are animals. Sometimes it's community helpers. Sometimes it's life cycle connected to different sorts of primarily science and social studies units. And so I'm going to be using the resources that give me rich photographic images that I can go and, using my librarian brain, assess for what information a kid might be able to get out of it, how factually correct it is. I'm very lucky in my district. We have a pretty robust digital resource budget. Our state does as well. Our state library does as well. So I'm using primarily ImageQuest from Britannica. And I'll talk in a little bit why I particularly like that one for my older students. Pebble Go from Capstone's got a lot of great photos that you can grab, and they've got those short little videos. I call them silent videos only because you don't have a narrator over them. You don't have somebody explaining. You might hear the water in the background, or you might hear the wind blowing, but there's nothing else interfering with your ability as an observer to glean information. There's nobody else interpreting it for you. And that's really important to me with these kids.
And something else that's important is that the images you're using are in context. So you don't have them. I know that it's entirely possible to remove the background from a lot of images. And, when you're doing an image search, you can create a transparent background. So all you're getting is just the rainbow unicorn cat and not the background. And that is, in this case, you would not want to do that because the context is what you are hoping your students will apply to whatever the subject is in the image. So if it's an orangutan, it's not got a white background. It is actually where it lives and, surrounded by its food source or whatever, or with its young.
Exactly.
So yeah, you want to make sure that your images are rich in detail about context.
Yes. And I mostly use photos of animals. And I'm looking constantly for that habitat piece, that food source piece, that social piece. Do they carry their young? Do they have multiple young? Are they traveling in a pack or some kind of social group? Or are they out on their own in the world? And that's really, really important to me because a kid can't use that as a resource to get information if all I'm doing is giving them just a straight up photo of a penguin. So the photos, from a proper digital resource are fantastic. Nat Geo Kids, another good source for that, World Book Kids, places like that. And a color printer. I was a little bit on my back foot. There were a couple of weeks where our color printer at school was down, and I was trying to get more copies done for our conference in November. And I needed like 10 more. I'm like, oh no, what am I going to do? What am I going to do? So the school color printer, the resources provided from your district for images. And then I have the little plastic.
Yeah, page protectors.
Page protectors.
I got to tell you, lamination. and this is something I joke about at the high school because my school never seems to run out of laminate, and it's a high school. And I remember at the elementary school when I used to be in charge of the laminating machine at the elementary school, we would run out of laminate by Halloween. And if the budget for laminate was spent
by September.
Yes. And people would come into the building like over the summer. And I'm like, why are you here? And they're like, shh, don't tell. I'm getting laminating done. And I was like, oh. So yes, and it was absolutely. And fun fact, last time I checked, laminate is tied to the price of petroleum. It is, yes. So I believe somebody explained that the reason why the cost of lamination fluctuates is because it is a petroleum product, and so those costs would also be involved. So yes. Anyway, but yes, it was funny because lamination at the high school level doesn't mean the same thing that it does at the elementary school level. But yes, page protectors are vastly more cost effective, and it allows you to be certainly more adept at switching things in and out. If you haven't had a chance to laminate, you just throw those images into your page protectors, you're good to go.
Yeah. And I've been using the same box of page protectors for 6 years now. Yeah. And it related to, I could laminate all this. I could use half our laminator roll for all of these, or you could buy me a box of page protectors. I got the box of page protectors again, and I've been using them for years, swapping it out, whether it's what we're talking about today or the primary sources I use during the social studies lessons. They have done yeoman's work, those poor little page protectors. And then, again, not to plug, but having the Microsoft suite of products is really helpful for this because of the icons. So Word and PowerPoint have those great little insert icons. And I use the icons a lot because my preschoolers are pre-readers. That's why we're using the visual resources again. And so I can put up this picture of a house and we can talk about the habitat. I can put up, a wave, and I can put up, clouds in the sky. Where does your animal live? And they can get that pretty clearly from the icon without me having to do anything else.
Well, and friends, what I might recommend for those of us who are on Google Noun Project, if you look at Noun Project, it is icons for anything. And these are accessible, and I have not had a problem with getting the icons I needed using the Noun Project. I will link it in the show notes. Absolutely. Awesome. So we have these images, and walk us through, once you've got these images that you're going to use, what does a lesson look like?
Sure. So for our preschoolers, they have these full-page images. I will use one of the slides programs, Slides or PowerPoint, and I'll put the name of what the animal is. I'm not trying to have them guess. And I'm not picking really obvious animals either. They're some slightly different. I like to lead with our whole group, and we'll look at a picture of a loris. And I like using a loris because there's a lot going on with that animal, and it usually provokes the whole, oh, it's so cute. And when I'm trying to get facts out of kids, and I do this with pandas too, is it's cute a fact? Well, okay. Then we talk about facts versus opinions, so I can bird walk down that with kids. But we start with the loris as a whole group, and I project it on the screen, and I just say to them, what can you tell me about this animal just by looking at this picture? And we're going to take a few seconds, and we're going to look quietly, and then I'm going to take quiet raised hands because we're dealing with 3 and 4 and 5-year-olds, and we're still learning routines. And then we can get a lot out of that picture, right? I'm always surprised at what kiddo brings the background knowledge. And Aloris has really big bulging eyes at the front of their head. And this year I had a 4-year-old who knew why those big bulging eyes in the front of the head were important, what it said about it as a predator versus a prey. And that just knocked my socks off, because you never know where that little bit of great information is going to come from. It's not going to come from me. It's going to kind of come from the kids in the room. So again, we'll look at that as a group, and then I will have many more pictures than we have kids in the room. And depending on the students, I'll either deal them out or I'll set them on top of a low bookshelf and have them just grab one that looks interesting to them. And we'll take a couple minutes and they'll look quietly at their own. Now, my preschoolers don't stay quiet for very long, and they will start to bubble up with conversation, and they'll start to talk to one another and elbow one another. Oh, mine has this, mine has that. And they'll start making connections themselves without me needing to build that in. That's a function of the age group, right? They're just going to chat with each other. Oh, mine. Oh, that looks kind of like mine does. And so then I get out of their way in this introductory lesson. If they're going to get up and start walking around to each other with their pictures and looking, making these connections without me saying, okay, who has one that, flies in the air? Who has one that swims in the water? Who's got fur? Who's got feathers? The preschoolers will do that themselves. With my first and second graders, sometimes I'll have to build those structures in because they have been schooled, right? They're waiting for directions. So that's what I'll do with the pictures probably first with our preschoolers.
Can I ask, because ultimately you're going to need to talk over, what are your attention getters? Because I remember that a lot of teachers are very specific with the attention getters they like. Some like to use a chime, some like to use a clicker, or some have 1, 2, 3, eyes on me, 1, 2, eyes on you. But what do you do? You've got this sort of cacophony of excitement. You've got all these kiddos who have something in their hand that they want to share, and all of them want to share at the same time. So how do you get their attention and then make it possible for kids to share without feeling their ideas weren't being validated?
Sure. So we are both a responsive classroom and an Avid school. So there are two things that we use school-wide. And there are also things that I've used across schools. One is a chime, and everybody knows, and preschoolers are learning, chime, stop what you're doing, hands up. And we use waterfall, shh. So waterfall, and then all the kids do little things with their fingers and go, shh.
But I love that.
Which is, I like to say, is the only time you hear shush in my library.
It does. That makes a lot of sense. And,
it's very
rather than
quiet,
getting louder, they get quieter, and they sort of have to deflate, and they sort of have to come down, and you have a physical motion, and it's also, wow, that's a great one. I like that. Okay. All right. Cool. That's awesome. Okay. So sorry. All right. I interrupted.
No, that's okay. No, that's great.
They are starting to do this grouping on their own.
Yes. Like I said, the older students will need that help, but my preschoolers, they don't. And I think that's really fascinating about this age group. It's one of the really cool things about working with them, because they want to make those connections. They had that sort of natural curiosity and desire to learn in their brains. And that's really wonderful. When I'm trying to make this more of a research project for them, we will bring in those Bill Martin, Eric Carle books, polar bear, brown bear, brown bear. And I will do a pretty traditional opening lesson with those, with the requisite early childhood finger plays and songs and call and response or felt board stories that might feel more comfortable and familiar to my fellow librarians who work with preschoolers regularly. So that's our first lesson. And then the next one, we'll go back and we'll have these images tied specifically to the animals that were in the book. And we'll start our research that way. And I'm using pictures, yes, because of all the reasons we talked about earlier in building that visual literacy, but also because they don't read yet. And way to bury the lead, Valerie. They don't read yet. But I still want them to be researchers. I want them to be inquirers. I want them asking questions. So this gives them the chance to use a rich visual source and do research. And they will sit with that image that tied to something we had in the book, and they will get that information out again because we've practiced as a class before, right? We've had a prior experience with images about animals. We've done it whole group, we've done it individually, we've had that sort of walk around, bop around, and now they're seeing it again in a different unit. And so it feels comfortable and more familiar to them. That is not to say that they ace this. That is not to say that they are doing this like a 12 or a 13-year-old would. They are still 3, 4, and 5 years old. And so having appropriate expectations is super important. And then they'll come in the next time, and my predecessor got a bunch of iPads into the library. And so we'll bring those up, again, not a commercial for Capstone, but to Pebble Go. And they'll have that AML up on Pebble Go. And they'll have the picture there, and we'll have other resources. If I can come across any realia that I can use in a school, about the only kind you can is snakeskin, really, I will. I'll have audio file recordings on another piece. And so the kids will go around and they will get information in a way that is still very accessible for pre-readers.
Yeah. Well, and I want to throw in, I'm going to date myself, but when I taught elementary, it was for 14 years. My first 14 years of my library career was in elementary schools. And I remember the importance of pairing fiction and nonfiction together. And when you had animals, it was really easy. So for me, it was Click, Clack, Moo, Cows That Type by Doreen Cronin. And
Sure.
then you pull out your farm animal books from your 632s, or I'm trying to remember what is farm animals, and is it 632?
It's in the 600s.
Yeah, it's in the 600s. And then I was remember pairing. You've got all those farm animals in Doreen Cronin's story, Click Clack Moo, Cows That Type, and then you've got your farm animals, and then looking at the fiction versus nonfiction, and then taking that lesson in a multitude of directions, but using the skills of observation to do that, especially with non-readers, or excuse me, pre-readers. How about that?
Pre-readers, right?
Yeah.
And then we'll throw in another term there, which is important for the scaling of this, and that's striving readers, right? Our kiddos who we might already be expecting to decode text, but maybe aren't quite on grade level or where we want to see them yet, or they're acquiring a second, third, fourth, or fifth language when they're learning English, and we want to make it easier for them, right?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Absolutely. So I'm dying to know, Valerie, you don't just let the kids go. There is some allocated time to model and to practice skills before they go work in their groups, in their teams.
Right. So as I said, we've got that whole group practice up front. That's always really important. They've had that individual building time where it feels to them like I'm letting them go a little bit, but as the teacher, I know what I want happening in that conversation. It's when we get to that sort of those tables where we've got the audio files and the little videos and the press play so you can hear it being read for you, that piece where they start to build their own expertise. And my goal for them is to become an expert on their animal so that they can talk about it with others. That's really important because we show what we know, right? And I make myself available to them if they have questions. And I have my laptop and I show them when I'm looking up information on one of our other databases that maybe has a higher reading level. And okay, so I'm going to go to Britannica Elementary, or I'm going to go to World Book Student, and you're going to look with me while I get this additional information to answer the question you have. I'm not going to pull it out of my brain because I want them to see me going to a reliable, vetted resource to do this. And we take a couple classes to do that, and then they're talking about what they know. Usually they're recording their information by drawing, you know. It's difficult to get my preschoolers to write their name. They're still acquiring that skill. To be fair, a lot of our kindergartners across the country, this is not just my students, we're still learning to write our names. So to expect them to write down 3 facts about something about a beluga whale is a little ridiculous. But drawing a picture about it and, it lives in the water, it eats this kind of thing, it lives in this many animals in its grouping, they can draw all that, right? And then it depends on the size of the class in terms of how they show what they know. If I have, as has been typical in the last few years, those Head Start classes have gotten really big. If we've got 18 to 20 kids, we are not doing whole group presentations. Nobody's going to sit through that. They wouldn't sit through that as a 6th grader. So we'll get into smaller groups with 3 or 4, and they'll go around and talk about what they've learned about their animal. If I've got a smaller class of 7 or 8, yes, we'll do that whole group.
Okay, got it. Beyond your tinies, these visuals can also be utilized by other grades. Again, because when you've done something, why not, I dare I say, use the word recycling? Why not, repurpose the resources that you've generated for one particular lesson to be incorporated into a lesson that might be used with a different grade level?
Absolutely. Because again, and we're not spending our own money here, as we talked about at the beginning. These are district or state resources or school resources that we're using. Get the most bang for your non-buck here. I have been reusing most of these images for the last 6 years. It started out as a 1st grade lesson when my teachers came to me and said, "You don't have enough books in the library to support our striving readers or our English language acquisition readers. We need them to be able to do this project. What can you do for us?" I'm like, I'm going to go to the previous sources we've mentioned and get some really great pictures worth 1,000 words images so these kids can participate as well. And so that was its first need. I scaled it down for preschool because at the time I was in an international baccalaureate public school and inquiry all the time. And so we were using these constantly with our preschool classes. 2nd graders have used these resources within their animal units. My Cat B classes use them often. It helps them with some of their language formulation and their communication, for sure. And of course, as I mentioned near the beginning, I've got 28 home languages in my current school. At my prior school, we had 32 home languages. So we're dealing with a lot of English language acquisition. For me to throw my primarily English language nonfiction at them is unfair. I need to level the playing field. Woe be to the word now, but it's an important word. I think it's not equitable to do that to those students. And again, we're in a school. We're about the business of education. And so this to me feels a lot more fair so they can learn with everybody else. I am planning to use these images with my 5th graders. Shh, don't tell. Later in the year, as we're looking again at visual discrimination and building on their artificial intelligence skill sets. And for them, I'm going to use the images from ImageQuest that Britannica does. And I want to say specifically why. And that's because Britannica puts watermark on their images. Their little thistle shows up. If you look really, really carefully, you see that Britannica thistle. And I want to see, so part of this is me testing something. I want to see how long it takes some of those kids to find that thistle. Like, there's something wrong with this picture. There's something wrong with this picture. They need to be able to know that there's something wrong with that picture, right? So that's its next use.
I love it. I love it. The versatility of this format and the fun thing about this lesson for me, like I said earlier, my nonfiction collection just flies off the shelf. because the students want to then further investigate to deepen their understanding of what they're learning that you introduce them to. And it's a great way to sort of move through your nonfiction and make sure that, the students are getting exposed to all sorts of things, not just the puppies and the kittens, but also, expanding it into other nonfiction and really strengthening their visual literacy to incorporate text and the book as a whole. Can you give me some feedback that you've gotten from your teachers? Because whenever we help the teachers do their jobs, I know that it is always appreciated. But what are some things that you have heard from your colleagues when they are aware of the kinds of things that you're teaching in your space?
Oftentimes it's surprise, right? They're running around in your what? Sometimes, when people aren't used to a modern school library, it's a little unnerving, I think. And so some people are a little discombobulated by the kind of learning that's happening with our youngest learners in the space. And that's not just at my current school, that's over the last several, because it's a different kind of approaching lesson planning and lesson execution with preschoolers. Oftentimes it is. We're doing a story, we're doing finger plays, we're doing felt board stories. And those things are great and they have their place and I use them too, right? But I think there's also room for variety. When our teachers have been in to see what's happening. And that's not all the time because their IAs come, their instructional assistants come. I am still their planning time, right? But when they come in and witness or catch something at the end, or I might deliberately go a little bit late, and I'm kind of known for going a little bit over because I want the teachers to see, right? I want them to see what their students are doing. They're usually kind of impressed. And I'm not impressed with me. They're impressed with the thinking that their students are doing. Again, just because they're little doesn't mean that they're dumb. Their brains are on fire. And when we don't give them every opportunity, those littles, to grow their brains, to show what they know, to become more expert in things that they care about or that they might want to care about, right? Moving them off the dinosaur race car track a little bit. We help those kids and we help those teachers do their job. So the feedback's is usually really good when they know what's happening. And that's difficult when you're on a fixed schedule, to be honest.
Absolutely, because you teach something every week, and all of a sudden it may not tie in nicely with what's happening in the classroom, but we do the best we can. So, Valerie, I'm so grateful you shared so much of this lesson and how it works on so many different levels in your space. We have all gotten back from the holidays. Share with us what you are doing with a class or two before we let you go.
Sure. When we come back in the new year, I have my kids deep in research across grade levels. And so before winter break, we were doing some image analysis, primary source analysis, art analysis, and multiple grade levels. And we were generating ideas through topics. We use guided inquiry design in my school district. And so we had done our open, we had done our immerse, and we had done our explore part. For those who are familiar with guided inquiry, that will make sense. If not, we can put guided inquiry design in the show notes and people can go look. And right now with third and fourth grade, I'm working through the question formulation technique. I love QFT. Use it often, and we have done that as a whole class, and now they're working on their own topic and generating questions using the question formulation technique to dive into research tied to ancient civilizations with my third graders and tied to colonial Virginia and colonial America with my fourth graders. Oh, fifth grade. Oh, Amy. Oh, fifth grade. We are doing science. We're doing landforms and kinetic energy, and they are acting at this. To be fair, this is a project-based learning thing that some of our central office folks came up with that we've adapted and modified a little bit. But they are acting as civil engineers to create a landform with a partner that they will build out. So they're doing a three-dimensional topographical map. We've talked about topo maps. And they're going to build a roadway, and they're going to shoot a marble down the roadway, make sure it doesn't veer off the landscape. And they'll iterate it. They'll play around with it. It gives me a chance to use the makerspace stuff. And then also to bring in some experts because, see, you get me started on this. I could go all day. We are under renovation right now. And So I've got construction guys around all the time, and I'm the daughter of a structural engineer. And you get me around a concrete mixer, and I am in my happy place. I had 3 of them in the library today, and I'm like, oh, tell me what's going on with this. Where's the rebar? Where's the this? Where's the that? But they're going to come in, and they're going to talk to my 5th graders about road runoff and what happens when like pollution and the stuff that comes out of the cars leaves the roadways and gets into the environment. It's going to be awesome because then we're making connections to the men and women who are working on their school. And that's super, super important to me because, it's all about the humans, right?
Absolutely, because it would be very easy to ignore them, and I dare I say, if you've ever had your school taken over by projects which have gone well past their scheduled time, it would be very hard to almost resent having these individuals in our spaces when we're trying to do our jobs and they are trying to do theirs. But if you find a space where you can appreciate what they are doing and the contributions that they're making to your school long after they leave, I mean, that's got to mean something. I realize that time is precious, but good for you for seeing value in the experts that come into our spaces, regardless of their calling and their specialties, what they do, and that's amazing. Oh my goodness, Valerie, thank you so much. You've provided us with a lot of things we can look into after this conversation is over. I want to wish you a very happy new year. Would you tell listeners the best way to reach out to you with any questions they might have?
Sure. And first, Amy, thanks for having me. I really appreciate it. It was great to get to meet you at our state school library conference and great to get to know you a little bit more as we've communicated over the last couple of weeks. Anybody who's listening, you're going to put my work email in the show notes. Please use that judiciously. We've got a pretty healthy spam filter on our work email, but that would be the best way to reach me. I don't really do social media for work. We've got some pretty strong restrictions on that. So that'd be best since we're talking about work stuff anyway.
Valerie Jopeck, Happy New Year, and thank you so much. I look forward to our paths crossing in the future.
Absolutely, Amy. Stay in touch. Happy New Year.
If you found this episode helpful, please share it out with your team, your PLN, and on social media. Be sure to follow on your favorite podcatcher so you'll never miss an episode. And if you really like listening today, consider leaving a review wherever you listen to podcasts. Reviews help others find us. If you're curious to know how often your state or country has been featured on the podcast, then simply click on the link, which can be found in our show notes. Search title, author, state, and country, and do a Command F search. I hope this is the year you consider being a guest on the show. Please visit the FAQs in every episode and you'll realize just how easy it is. We all have something to share. Make 2026 your time to shine. I hope you consider sharing one of your tried and true approaches to conflict resolution at work and email me soon. You might just discover you like recording and consider maybe recording an episode of your own one day in the near future. The topic of our next episode is Need to Weed and my conversation with Elise DeCoy. I hope you will tune in.